Hi, I'm Jane Mudgett, and welcome to Coach, C2C. I am really excited about being here today. I am with my partner and colleague, Wally Schmader. Welcome, Wally.
Good morning.
Wally is the founder of Exceptional Leaders Lab, and I'm a partner there, and he's just super. He's been a great mentor and coach to me and a great collaborator along the way. So today we're going to focus on what both of us do, which is right down to the nitty-gritty of exceptional coaching, but that's executive coaching specifically. So I want to talk about a couple of things first about having a coaching environment in your own office, in your own business. And it takes a long time to build that environment. It really means being vulnerable and asking questions and being open. So you create an environment of trust where people are willing to give feedback and, more importantly, listen to feedback. It's an environment usually that focuses on individual strengths, is not a negative environment where we have lots of positive reinforcement. Anything you'd like to add to that, Wally, as far as how to build that corporate environment before we get down to the details?
Just a quick set. I want to say how well that was very well said. That's exactly what a lot of high performance organizations that leverage executive coaching feel like. And the biggest thing for me, and it sounds very simplistic, but just that it's a compliment to be coached, right? If someone sponsors a coach for you or decides that it's a good investment to have an executive coach or professional coach, that's someone saying, I think you can get a lot better. I think you've got a lot of upside. And it's one of the nicest things a manager or leader can do. So just the idea of seeing it that way, I think is maybe the effect of a positive coaching culture. So I totally agree with you.
Right. So coaching can be done in two levels. It can be done from a leadership level with their team within the organization, and you can go outside of the organization and have some coaching done with an executive coach. And it's sometimes nice to have that third party on the side that's not involved in the details of the company. So how do you know when you need a coach, or what are the things that come to mind? And one of the things that I see frequently is that people are looking for more responsibility. They're looking for a promotion that didn't come around. They are also could be in a frenzy and disorganized, and for some reason can't find a way to find structure. They may be overwhelmed with all the things that need to do and the priorities of not only their job, but their team, or if it's multiple departments. Those are a few things that come to mind when someone else needs a coach. Anything you want to add to that, Wally?
Yeah, that's a good start. I would think that on behalf of the candidate, there's this awareness of a gap between how much contribution they think they could make to an organization and how much they're making, right? Like,
Right.
I know I could do this, but I'm only given the opportunity to do that. And the other one is something like the way that someone's being perceived, almost like a professional brand kind of thing, where they're just not, they don't get me, or they're not seeing me in the way that I'd like to be seen. And sometimes that's where, to your point earlier, the objective outside coach can be really useful versus an inside coach, because that outside lady or man brings a blank slate, right? Which is one of the biggest gifts you can give someone is a blank slate to start with, and you don't know anything about what they're good at or their reputation or their current brand. So that's what I would add.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I've always said that with new employees, if you can really get new employees engaged, that is the only time where they come in with new eyes. When you work with an outside coach, they do come in with new eyes and don't carry the baggage that you might have for length of service and relationships, not necessarily negative experiences, but they don't come with that. So I think that's a good point. One of the things that I like in coaching is that there are lots of different kinds of coaching, and Wally's going to touch on certified coaches and our ELL process in a minute, but we're focusing right now on executive coaching. And I think it's really important to think about what are the requirements that you have going in on executive coach to hire an executive coach. And I think it's important to ask that person or that organization, what is their assessment process? It's important to have a discovery and assessment process that does focus on the strengths, that does identify where you have the most upside, where there is a chance to really leverage those strengths and that knowledge and skill that you already have. And conversely, you don't want it to be analysis paralysis. So there's a fine line between assessment versus over-assessment. Addition to that, it's helpful when an executive coach understands basic business strategies and how corporate structures work. They don't have to be an expert in your industry. I mean, you're the expert in your industry. They have to understand personality development, communication styles, and again, competencies that you may have or need to work on to be successful. And I think the final thing that strikes me that we see frequently is you really want to have some goals that are tied to outcomes, some measurable outcomes. And once again, I'll toss it to you, lob it to you, Wally. Any other things that you see that people need to look at when they're trying to select a coach?
Yeah, I think it was a great list. Coaches have specialties, right, as you would expect, and some are much better at working with upper level executives. I make a distinction between hired gun kind of leaders and entrepreneurial leaders because they have different skill sets, and so we have to be careful there. But I think, make sure they've got experience. That's kind of the price of entry. And then once you get past that experience qualifier, meaning they've either been in a similar role than what you're in, or they've got this many years of experience or a certain certification like what we do at ELL, then it comes down to the personality. I think that you've got to have a long conversation with someone that feels like a coaching conversation, ask them questions about what they think works in a coaching relationship, and you're going to end up either syncing up with that person or not. And I'll promise you that you'll know that between 15 to 20 minutes. You'll know if they're going to sync up or not. I read something the other day, Jane, that the average hiring HR person who's hiring executive coaches from outside of an organization does 3 interviews. So usually they find one in those first 3 interviews that's a good match. So if you've got the competency and this great personality match, a lot of really, really great things can happen.
Right. And if they don't match, that doesn't necessarily mean you're a bad coach. It means you're not in sync with that person. And so there are other kinds of people that you might be more in sync with. I think that's a good point. And the other thing that I was thinking about when you were thinking about or mentioned entrepreneurial leaders, having owned and managed businesses myself, my husband has over the years, it's tough. Who do you talk to when you're at the very top? If you're coaching all your employees and you're helping them improve and accomplish the mission and values of the organization, that's a perfect candidate of somebody that may need that outside view of how to be a better, more effective leader. So I think that's a good point.
Well, I'll add something to that, and that is my specialty, Jane, is executive coaching, and it's usually the top person there. And what's amazing is that person is the only one in the whole building that has no accountability. Isn't that crazy? Like the person with the most responsibility has the least accountability. Everybody else has certain things, but not that CEO. She gets to sit in there and not. So it's fascinating and funny, right? That shouldn't be the case. So sometimes that's the only reason they're getting that coach is, hey, I need some accountability to somebody, and you're going to be it.
Right.
So it's funny.
Right. Yeah. That is an irony, and that goes with that entrepreneur too. It's just at a very, very different level, and obviously totally different dynamics too. Well, one of the things that I like that I alluded to a minute ago is this idea of process. And at Exceptional Leaders Lab, I mean, thanks to you, Wally, we've had a process for years that has a nice structure to it. And the part that I like very much is that discovery part, very at the beginning, where you're really investing a lot of time with questions and answers and getting to know not just the personality, but what are the strengths, what are the things that need to be worked on with that leader. And to me, that's so important. And then the assessment is equally important. Why do you like doing the assessment, Wally? You're really good at that. Yeah.
Well, thank you. We've come to this, and you've been a big part of it, as you know, Jane, this process through some trial and error. And what we've found is if you can get that discovery part right in a brand new engagement, everything else is going to happen really positively. The outcomes can almost be guaranteed to be positive for the candidate if you get the discovery right. So I've got to understand where your upside is. I've got to understand where your soft spots are. I've got to understand what you want to get better at. I've got to understand there may be some blind spots. And through all that discovery, you get to that. And without that, and we'll err on the side of too much discovery, as you know, Jane, at ELL, versus not enough, right? Because we want to end up with 3, 4, 5 priorities that are actionable and measurable. So this is what we call results-focused coaching. And that way we agree with the candidate on these 3 things. And we know for sure when she gets better at these things, when he gets better at these things, when they get better at these things, they're going to be, their lid is going to be in a whole new place in terms of their professional career and their leadership. So it's very exciting, but only because of that discovery, only because we do the rigor on the front end.
Right. And I like that it's focused. Once we get to a list that's too broad, then it ends up being, as my painting instructor said, you keep adding colors and you just get brown. And what I mean by that is it just gets messy, right? It just gets too confusing. So you narrow it down to the items that you really need to focus on. And those 2, 3, or 4 items are really helpful.
Let me ask you a question. So all these coaches on our team and outside of ELL have target sort of profiles, target candidates they like working with. So how would you describe your ideal coaching candidate, Jane?
Well, I'd say primarily having owned a business and worked in corporate America, those are 2 areas I'm comfortable in both. But I like that arena where you either you go in with nothing or you go in with chaos. And that is, where is your mind right now that you don't know where to go next, or you go into this environment of chaos. And then that's sort of right for being able to have the discovery process and identifying what are those top priorities. It also means maybe you have some dissatisfaction in the work, or you have a lack of mission. Is that what puts you in those 2 categories? So I always had a philosophy for my own job, go in where there's nothing or there's chaos. And I find that with coaching, I feel the same way. And it may be because philosophically I believe that, but also the area that we mentioned earlier, if you find that you have a little dissatisfaction or you're off your game a little bit, sometimes you just need a third party for a period of 3 or 6 months to help you just get back in gear. So those are a couple of examples of candidates that I really like working with. Yeah. Thanks for asking. What's that? I'm describing a lot. Yeah.
That's a lot. Yeah. So I've had a chance, and I'll just tell your listeners, to work with Jane and watch her do her thing and go through some of the things that coaches do. We train together. We've gone through the same certification process. So if I were someone looking for a candidate to coach me, looking for someone as a coach, I would be, and I was someone who's sort of in a bottleneck during a slow part of my career. Jane is exactly the person that I would seek out, because she's a good listener, and she's been up and down the org chart herself a few times, and so she knows what that's like. Do you have any openings in your schedule? Could you take on a candidate or candidates?
Yeah, I couldn't this month in June, but I often work in quarters. Doesn't have to be, but coming up in early July, I actually have 3 executive coaching slots available. And I would welcome that to be someone in our community that we're talking, and I mean coaching community and leadership community. And, I think it's worth having that discussion. Number 1, first self-reflecting, is this the right time? Number 2, do you have a sponsor? I like the fact that you mentioned that earlier. If you have a sponsor, act on it. And then number 3, after you self-reflect, it does take a little while to find a coach that's perfect for you. So it's worth the inquiry and the investigative process to find out if there is that sync and if they do have that structure that you're looking for. So thanks for teeing that up. I appreciate that.
Of course.
And I like that we have, Wally, at Exceptional Leaders Lab, we have a number of different coaches in our stable. And so if in fact it isn't an immediate sync, that's okay. We don't take that personally. I love when that happens for me, but I also know that there's other folks, and there's 3 or 4 or 5 other folks now, actually more than that, that can help with that process. So today, in our idea of coach to coach and C2C, we've given you a few tips on when do you need a coach and how to identify that, how to select a coach, and the interview process and selection process that you might have or your HR department might have. And lastly, what is that? What is the discovery and assessment and measurable goal process that come out of coaching? So I really appreciate you, Wally, investing time with us today. I appreciate all of the folks that have been making comments about C2C. Hope you track us down for some coaching, or at least start reflecting on if that's something that's right for you. And we'll go from there. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks.